1:19 a.m., Persian Gulf, 61 nautical miles northeast of Bahrain. Iranian drones just appeared on a U.S. Navy destroyer's radar. 22 contacts, bearing southwest, altitude 400 feet, speed 110 knots, closing on the ship's position. The USS Gonzalez had 9 minutes before the first drone reached its engagement perimeter. American fighters were already airborne and turning toward the Gulf. Welcome to Navy Strikeforce. Today, we're going inside the 107 minutes that followed that drone detection. 107 minutes in which a 22-drone Iranian formation, a rapid fighter intercept response, and a layered defensive engagement that tested every weapon system on a frontline U.S. Navy destroyer revealed both the strength and the vulnerabilities of American naval defenses against the drone threat that has redefined modern maritime warfare. This is what a large-scale Iranian drone approach actually looks like from inside the combat direction center of a destroyer under active threat, and why the fighters that arrived overhead were only part of the solution, and in some ways created a problem of their own. To understand the specific threat that 22 drones represented to the Gonzalez at 1:19 a.m., you have to understand how Iranian drone doctrine has evolved from the simple single-vehicle attacks of 5 years ago to the coordinated multi-vector operations that now represent one of the most challenging tactical problems for U.S. naval surface forces. The first generation of Iranian drone employment in the Gulf region was straightforward. Single or small numbers of Shahed series drones launched from a fixed or semi-fixed location, flying a pre-programmed route toward a target. Effective against static or slow-moving targets with limited air defense coverage. Relatively easy to defeat for a vessel equipped with functioning Aegis and Phalanx systems, because a small number of slow drones attacking from a predictable direction is a problem that the existing weapons inventory solves readily. The 22 drone formation that appeared on the Gonzalez's radar at 1:19 a.m. was not that threat. The 22 contacts were distributed across approximately 6 nautical miles of lateral spread, a formation width that would force the Gonzalez's defensive systems to track and engage contacts across a wide bearing arc simultaneously. The formation was also split in altitude. 14 drones at approximately 400 feet, 8 drones at approximately 150 feet. The altitude split was not random. At 150 feet, the lower group was approaching the boundary of effective radar tracking in the sea clutter environment of the Gulf, the zone where wave return and low-flying targets become difficult to distinguish, and the formation was not approaching from a single direction. The primary axis was southwest, directly toward the ship's bow, but a secondary element of 6 drones was on a slightly different bearing, approaching from a bearing 28 degrees south of the primary axis. If the primary axis was northwest of the ship and the secondary was from the west, the Gonzalez would face simultaneous threats from 2 directions separated by 28 degrees. 2 directions, 2 altitudes, 22 contacts. The Combat Direction Center officer had the threat picture classified and a weapons allocation solution being generated by the Aegis combat system within 90 seconds of initial detection. The system had all 22 contacts tracked within 2 minutes, with engagement solutions for each. Then, the CDO identified the problem. The Gonzalez was carrying a standard wartime load of SM-2 Block 3B missiles, 74 rounds in vertical launch configuration. Engaging 22 drone contacts with 2 SM-2 missiles per contact, the doctrine-recommended load for a high-confidence kill would expend 44 SM-2s. That is 59% of the ship's total anti-air missile inventory, committed in a single engagement. If this 22 drone attack was the opening salvo of a larger operation, if a second wave was being held back while the first wave measured the defensive response, or if ballistic missiles were being prepared for launch behind the drone wave, a Gonzalez that had just expended 44 SM-2s would enter the subsequent engagement with a severely depleted magazine. The CDO had to make a weapons allocation decision that balanced the immediate threat against the possibility of a follow-on threat that was currently unknown. At the same time, the Gonzalez's SLQ-32 electronic warfare system was generating jamming options against the drone's data link frequencies. The primary Iranian drone types in use in the Gulf region used a combination of pre-programmed navigation and, in some variants, active data link updates during the terminal approach phase. Jamming the data link could cause drones using active guidance updates to lose mid-course correction capability, not necessarily killing them, but degrading their accuracy. Drones using purely pre-programmed inertial navigation would be unaffected by data link jamming. The CDO didn't know which variant he was dealing with across 22 contacts. At 1:22 a.m., 3 minutes after initial detection, the two A-18F Super Hornets that had been on a combat air patrol orbit 70 nautical miles northwest of the Gonzalez received the redirect order and began their approach. Transit time at combat speed, approximately 7 minutes. The drone formation would enter the Gonzalez's hard kill engagement envelope in 6 minutes. The fighters would arrive approximately 1 minute after the engagement began. This is the timing problem that defines fighter support of a surface vessel under drone attack. Fighters are enormously capable against drone threats. An F/A-18F carrying AIM-9X. Sidewinders can engage drones at visual range with high reliability, conserving the ship's missile inventory and using the aircraft's speed and maneuverability to pursue contacts that might escape the ship's engagement envelope. But fighters take time to transit, and drone attacks are frequently timed to arrive at the target before fighter support can intervene in the opening phase. Iran understood this timing gap. At 1:24 a.m., the CDO made his weapons allocation decision. Activate full-spectrum electronic jamming immediately. Commit SM-2 resources to the secondary approach element first, the 6 drones approaching from the western bearing, since the fighters arriving from the northwest would be positioned to engage the primary formation after their transit. Activate Phalanx CIWS in surface/air track mode for close-in terminal defense against any contacts that survive the SM-2 engagement. It was a calculated division of labor between the ship's own systems and the incoming fighter support, a decision that required the CDO to trust that the 2 Super Hornets would arrive and engage effectively within the 1-minute window after the engagement envelope opened. The electronic jamming activated at 1:25 a.m. Within 90 seconds, 4 of the 22 drone contacts showed behavioral changes consistent with data link disruption. 2 began gradual course deviations from the formation axis. 1 descended to below 50 feet altitude and appeared to lose stable navigation. And 1 ceased forward progress entirely and entered a slow circular pattern. 4 of 22 neutralized by electronic means before a missile was fired. 18 contacts remaining. Hard kill required. SM-2 engagement began at 1:26 a.m. against the secondary western bearing element. 6 contacts. SM-2 two-shot engagement sequence per contact. 12 missiles expended over 4 minutes of engagement. 5 of 6 secondary element contacts destroyed. 1 survived the SM-2 engagement and continued closing. The contact that had been flying at 150 feet throughout. The altitude that degraded the Aegis radar's tracking confidence to the point where the intercept geometry was marginal. The Phalanx CIWS acquired that contact at 1:29 a.m. and engaged it at 340 meters with a 1.8-second burst. Contact destroyed. Secondary western element neutralized completely. 12 SM-2s expended plus Phalanx ammunition. No impact on the Gonzalez. The primary southwest element, 16 contacts, now reduced to 12 after the 4 electronic jamming neutralizations, was entering the SM-2 engagement envelope at 1:28 a.m. The CDO was preparing to commit additional SM-2 resources when the radio crackled. Demon 1 and Demon 2 on station. The 2 Super Hornets had arrived. The section leader had the 12 contact primary formation on his radar and his FLIR at 1:28 a.m. He descended to 1,500 feet and began engaging with AIM-9X Sidewinders, a heat-seeking, short-range air-to-air missile with a minimum range suitable for drone engagement, and a seeker sensitive enough to acquire the small thermal signature of a drone engine at short range. Over the next 6 minutes, the two Super Hornets conducted a pursuit engagement against the primary formation. The aircraft were operating at speeds far above the drone's 110 knots, which meant each engagement pass required the pilot to slow significantly, an aerodynamically uncomfortable condition for an aircraft optimized for high-speed flight, or to make a single high-speed passing shot with minimal time on the target bearing. The Super Hornets killed 8 of 12 contacts in 6 minutes. 4 contacts survived the fighter engagement and continued toward the Gonzalez. The Gonzalez's CDO had held back SM-2 resources to cover exactly this scenario. 4 contacts, 2 SM, 2 shots per contact, engagement window available. 8 missiles committed at 1:34 a.m. 3 contacts destroyed. 1 survived the SM-2 engagement, altitude 70 feet, speed now reduced to 90 knots, bearing closing to 600 meters before the phalanx acquired and engaged at 1:36 a.m. The last drone of the 22 contact formation was destroyed at 1:36 a.m., 17 minutes after initial detection. The engagement summary: 22 drones, 4 neutralized by electronic jamming, 6 destroyed by SM, 2 against secondary element, 1 destroyed by phalanx terminal defense against secondary element, 8 destroyed by F/A, 18F AIM 9X engagement against primary element, 3 destroyed by SM, 2 against primary element survivors, 1 destroyed by phalanx terminal defense against primary element survivors, 0 impacts on the Gonzalez, 0 casualties, 0 damage. Total SM-2 expenditure, 20 missiles. The CDO's decision to reserve SM-2 resources for follow-on coverage, rather than committing a full 2-shot salvo against the primary element independently, had conserved 24 SM-2s compared to an all-Aegis engagement approach. The fighters had been responsible for 8 kills that would otherwise have required 16 SM-2s. The division of labor had worked, but the post-engagement assessment identified something that the clean engagement summary obscured. The 22 drone formation had been timed and structured with a precision that went beyond simple volume attack. The altitude split, 14 high, 8 low, had forced the Aegis system to maintain simultaneous track on contacts at 2 different altitude bands, which increased the computational load on the tracking radar and degraded the confidence of some individual track solutions. The 2 bearing axis approach had forced the CDO to make an explicit choice about which element to address with fighters and which element to address with ships' missiles. A choice that any Iranian planner watching the engagement could use to build a predictive model of US defensive resource allocation under multi-axis drone attack. Furthermore, the 4 contacts neutralized by electronic jamming had all been from the secondary Western element, the element that the CDO had chosen to engage with ships' missiles rather than fighters. The 12 contact primary element had not shown jamming susceptibility. That element appeared to be using purely inertial navigation, a guidance architecture that the SLQ-32 jamming could not affect. The secondary element, which had shown jamming susceptibility, had been used as a decoy. Its apparent vulnerability to electronic warfare had encouraged jamming resource commitment that revealed the limits of US jamming effectiveness against the inertially guided primary formation. Iran had sent a test swarm. The 6 susceptible drones in the secondary element were the test. The 16 inertially guided drones in the primary element were the actual threat, and the structure of the formation had been designed to generate a US response that revealed which jamming approaches were effective and which were not. The 17-minute engagement had cost Iran 22 drones. What it had bought was a detailed map of the Gonzalez's defensive response sequence, her weapons allocation logic under multi-axis attack, her jamming frequency employment against different drone guidance architectures, and the arrival timeline and engagement methodology of fighter support from the nearest CAP orbit. In the weeks following the incident, Fifth Fleet reviewed drone defense protocols with specific attention to the multi-axis, multi-altitude attack profile that the Gonzalez had faced. The review generated updated engagement procedures that varied the defensive resource allocation sequence to reduce predictability. It also identified that the current fighter Kiapi orbit positioning left a 7-minute gap between drone detection and fighter arrival, a gap that the Iranian attack had been specifically timed to exploit. Kiapi orbit repositioning in the Gulf was modified to reduce that gap to 4 minutes for the highest priority patrol sectors, but the behavioral data from the 17-minute engagement already existed. Iran had learned what it came to learn, and 22 drones was not their maximum capacity. Stay sharp, stay informed. This is Navy Strikeforce. We'll see you in the next one.